Welcome everyone to today's network seminar. Today our speaker is Sharath, who's a PhD student working with Professor Rajesh Sundaresan. Um, so he'll be speaking about metastability phenomenon, last deviations of stationary regime. So Sharath,
Yeah.
you can
Thanks,
start.
Krishna. Am I audible?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So I'm going to speak about something called metastability phenomenon, and then I will speak about how to use the theory of large deviations to understand or quantify that phenomenon. Okay. So there are mainly three parts to the talk. So the first part is about metastability. So let's consider this example of a double well potential. So you consider this ODE, dxt equals negative u prime of xt. So let's consider this function u. So essentially, when you start the ODE at some point, then you move in the negative of the derivative direction. So if you start here, then here the derivative is negative, so you move in the positive direction. If you start here, then you move in this direction, and so on. And for this example, there are three special points. So the origin, then A and B. So if you start in either A, B, or the origin, then the derivative of u is 0. So therefore you stay there. So these points are called equilibria. The points A and B are stable equilibria in the sense that if you start near a point A, then you go closer to A. Whereas if you start near the origin, then you go far away from the origin. Okay. Now let's add some noise to this ODE. So here I'm adding a Gaussian noise. So here dBt is the white noise, and you have a small parameter in front of the noise, which is epsilon. So you can think of Bt as a normal random variable with mean 0 and variance t, and the trajectories of B have independent and stationary increments. Okay, so it turns out that this process, when you add noise to this ODE, you can define a Markov process. So I'm denoting that using x epsilon. Now let's see how the trajectories of this Markov process will evolve. So again, here is the function u. So if you start from this point, then since the noise parameter epsilon is very small, the derivative is almost going to be equal to the negative of u prime. So essentially you move in this direction, but then there is going to be some noise because of this added noise. And so once you reach a neighborhood of B, then u prime is close to 0. Then for a very long time, you're going to stay around the point B. But then there is still noise in the system, even though it's very small. So at some point, you're going to cross this barrier and then go to A. Okay. So essentially, there are two equilibria here, A and B. So A and B are very stable equilibria for the system. And if you observe the system for a fixed duration of time, then you see the process either around A or B. But then if you observe the process for a very long time, then you see these transitions from A to B. So such phenomena where a process exhibits very different behavior over different time scales is called the metastability phenomenon. Okay. So this is the first example. So we consider another example. This is in the context of wireless networks. So this is a mean field model. So in a mean field model, there are n particles, and each particle has a state associated with it, which evolves over time in a Markovian fashion. Okay, and there is a state space Z, which you can think of it as a finite set. Now, for these particles, certain transitions are allowed, which is specified by a directed graph. To specify the transition rates of this Markov evolution, we have to define this quantity called the empirical measure. So empirical measure at time t, what we do is we put a Dirac measure at the state of the little nth particle, sum over all particles, and divide by n. So if set is a finite set, then this is going to be a probability vector, and the ith component of this is going to tell you what fraction of particles are there in state I at time t. I'm denoting the space of probability measures using M1 of Z. Okay. Now, to define the transition rates of these particles, we have to define certain functions. So for each edge in the graph, we define a function on the space of probability measures. And we say that a particle makes a Z to Z prime transition at time t. with rate lambda z comma z prime of mu n of t. Essentially, that means that if you're at state z, then your transition rate depends on the states of the other particles only through this empirical measure. So hence the name mean field interaction. So this description here gives us a Markov process, which is, if you look at the evolution of the joint state of all the particles over time, then it's a Markov process, and the state space is set to the n. Okay. So there is also a smaller process, which is the flow of the empirical measure process mu n. Because of the description, it turns out that this mu n is also Markovian, and you can easily identify its transition rates. So suppose that we are at state xi, and if a particle from z makes a jump to state z prime, then there is going to be a reduction of 1 over n in state z and an increment of 1 over n in state z prime. Each of these particles can make this transition at rate lambda z z prime, but depending on the present state xi. And then there are n times psi of z many particles that can potentially make this transition. So this is going to be the total rate. Now it turns out that this process mu n has a limiting behavior. So suppose that we let the initial conditions converge to a deterministic probability distribution. Then it turns out that the trajectories of this process mu n becomes very close to the solution of a certain ODE called the McKean-Vlasov equation. Okay, so here is the McKean-Vlasov equation. You start the McKean-Vlasov equation at some point nu, then there is an evolution. So with very high probability, the trajectory of the mu n will stay in an epsilon ball around this around the trajectory of this McKean-Vlasov equation. So essentially the point is that here also, in this example also, you can think of the process mu n as a ODE plus some noise. And so this is also like our first example where we added noise to the ODE. So metastability phenomena occurs here as well. So this is a more concrete example. So this is the example of a Wi-Fi network. So in a Wi-Fi network, there are nodes accessing a common wireless medium, and the nodes interact among themselves via the distributed MAC protocol implemented in the network. So we can think of the state of each node as representation of aggressiveness with which a packet is transmitted. And in a typical exponential back-off algorithm, the states change in the following fashion. So you start from state 0. State 0 is the most aggressive one. If you make a packet transmission and if you don't succeed, then you go to state 1, which is less aggressive than state 0. And then if you still don't make a successful transmission, then you go to state 2 and so on. And whenever you make a successful transmission, you go to the most aggressive state, which is state 0. So this is an example of the graph of the set of allowed transitions of each particle's state. So in this protocol, this is a sample path of mu n in a Wi-Fi example. So in this example, there are 30 wireless nodes, and there are 3 states. So x-axis shows the fraction of nodes in state 0, y-axis shows the fraction of nodes in state 1, and the remaining fraction is in state 2, which is not shown. Now this example is constructed in such a way that there are 2 equilibria, one around the origin and one around this point. So equilibrium near the origin is a bad equilibrium because everybody attempts too frequently, thereby nobody gets access to the channel. Whereas the equilibrium near the point 0.5, 0.5, that is a good equilibrium because everybody gets equal amount of throughput. Now in this example, the system is started somewhere here. So we see that for a very long time, the system remains in the neighborhood of this equilibrium, but then eventually you transit from this to the other equilibrium. Okay, so this is also a the metastability phenomenon occurs in this example also. Okay, so both of these examples can be put into this broader framework of what are called randomly perturbed dynamical systems. So the first example, we had a ODE, and then you perturb it using Gaussian noise, and your state space was the real line. And in the second example, we had the McKean-Vlasov equation, and then you add Poissonian noise because the particles are jumping and so on. So this is a Markov process with jumps, and the state space was the space of probability measures on Z. Okay, so more abstractly, we can think of a dynamical system taking values in some space. and then you add a small random perturbation that gives you a Markov process. And as the small random perturbation goes to 0, your random process will converge to this dynamical system. Typically, that's the case. And the goal of this talk is to understand or quantify metastability phenomenon in such situations of randomly perturbed dynamical systems. Okay, so let's go back to example 1 to define a more concrete goal. So in example 1, recall that we had the potential U, and then we had a ODE, and then we added noise to it. So it turns out that the process X epsilon, which is a Markov process, it is reversible, and it possesses a unique invariant probability measure. So the invariant measure P epsilon looks like this. So it is e to the minus 1 over epsilon square times U multiplied by a normalization constant. Okay. So in particular, if you evaluate this probability measure on some set A, then, and if you let epsilon go to 0, then you anticipate that this P epsilon of A is going to look like e to the minus 1 by epsilon square times the value of U, which is close to the minimum value of U on the set A. Okay, so in other words, you consider P epsilon A, and then you take the log and multiply with epsilon square. And then when you let epsilon go to 0, you see that this goes to a minus infimum of x in A of U of x. But in example 1, we could write down an explicit expression for invariant measure, but that is not the case in many examples. So the goal of this talk, so in the Wi-Fi example that I described, even when the nodes do not interact, that is, even when the functions lambda do not depend on the empirical measure, in that case itself, you can only get lower and upper bounds for the invariant measure. So, so the goal of this talk is more concretely is to identify a suitable function U so that we can obtain asymptotics of this form for the invariant measure. So once we do that, it explains metastability to some extent, because we can look at the function U, and then we can examine where are the valleys and where are the peaks, and that will tell you that there are multiple equilibria and so on. There are also many other interesting questions, such as asymptotics of exit times. That is, if you start at one equilibrium and you look at the exit time from the domain of attraction of that equilibrium, and then you, as the small noise parameter tends to 0, how does that scale? And similarly, since these processes are Markovian, you can talk about mixing time of these Markov processes. But these are questions that we will not address in this talk. But in this talk, we'll mostly focus on getting asymptotics of this form. Okay, so that is the metastability phenomenon and the motivation for this talk. If there are any questions, it's a good point to ask. Okay, so I will continue with the next part of the talk. So as we see here, so the probability invariant measure is of the form e to the minus 1 by epsilon square times U. So if you take a set, then if the set A does not contain the global minimizer of U, then this probability of A will go to 0. So basically, we are dealing with events of very small probability. So to quantify, to explain metastability, we have to deal with small probability events, and we do that using the theory of large deviations. Okay, so in this part, I will introduce this theory of large deviations. So in this, the setting is as follows: we have a metric space S, and we have a sequence of random variables taking values in S. Now, large deviations theory will essentially, roughly speaking, will be able to give us estimates of this form. So probability that xn is in A grows like e to the minus n times some constant IA, where that constant is given by infimization of a certain functional over A. Okay. So more precisely, this is the definition of a large deviation principle. So we have a sequence xn. So we say that a sequence xn of random variables satisfy the large deviation principle, LDP for short, if we can find a function I on S such that 3 conditions hold. So the first condition is a regularity property on the function I. So we want the function I to have have lower level sets compacts. So that is, you take a positive number m, and then you look at the set of all points in S whose I is less than or equal to m. We want the set to be a compact subset of S for every m. Then we have a lower and an upper bound. So the lower bound is in terms of open sets. So you look at so for every open set, we want this kind of a lower bound. So essentially, this means that you take probability of xn is in some open set. It should grow like it should be lower bounded by e to the minus n times infimum of I over g. Okay, and similarly, there is a there is an upper bound that should be satisfied for all closed sets F. If these three conditions are satisfied, then we say that xn satisfy the large deviation principle with right function I. So essentially, what this means is that once you establish a large deviation principle for a family of random variables, then it essentially means that the probability that xn is in A grows like e to the minus n times IA. Okay. So it turns out that there is also an equivalent formulation of this large deviation principle, which is given by Friedlein and Wenzel. This is more suited to study large deviations in the stationary regime. So here also we have a right function I, and the first condition remains the same. That is, we want the lower level sets to be compact. And the lower and upper bounds are replaced in the following fashion. So instead of looking at all possible open sets, you look at only a certain open set. That is, you only look at open balls, and you want the probability that if you look at the probability of the open ball around a point little x, that probability should have a lower bound of this form. Okay, and similarly for the upper bound, we only look at certain sets instead of all possible closed sets. So it turns out that this formulation is equivalent to the definition of Varadhan, and this is the formulation that is more suited to study large deviations in the stationary regime. So we'll come back to this. That is, we'll introduce a more stronger definition of stronger form of this definition to study large deviations in the stationary regime. Okay, so here is a concrete example of a large deviation principle. So this has to do with empirical measures of IID random variables. So let's say that we have a complete and separable metric space and a probability measure on S. So for example, you can have the real line and the standard Gaussian measure. Then you sample n IID random variables from this measure nu. And then we look at this quantity, the empirical measure. That is, you put a Dirac mass at the point xn, sum it over all n, and then divide by 1 over n. So you anticipate that this mn. So note that this mn takes values in the space of probability measures on S. Okay, and you anticipate that this mn will go to the true distribution as n goes to infinity. Okay, by the way, throughout the talk, whenever there is a probability space, it will be equipped with the weak topology. That is convergence against integrals of bounded continuous functions. Okay. So here is the precise statement of the theorem. So it turns out that the sequence mn also satisfy a large deviation principle, and the rate function is the relative entropy functional. That is, the relative entropy function in the first argument, where the second argument is fixed as nu. Okay, so roughly speaking, what this means is that you compute the probability that mn is in some set A that grows like e to the minus n times some constant, where that constant is given by infimization of the relative entropy over the set A. So the second argument is fixed, and the infimization is carried out on the first argument. Okay. So another thing about this large deviations is that you can derive new large deviation principles from old ones. And this is a means by which you can do that. So this is called contraction principle. And this is analogous to the continuous mapping theorem in weak convergence. So the setting is that there are two metric spaces, and we have a continuous mapping from S to T. And we have a sequence of random variables that taking values in S. And then we define another sequence yn as f of xn. Okay. And suppose that xn's satisfy the large deviation principle with some rate function I. Then the theorem tells us that yns also satisfy the large deviation principle with certain rate function j. So the rate function j is essentially obtained by, so if you take a point little y in t, then you look at all points x in S that maps to this little y, compute I of x, and then take the infimum. So it's very easy to show this. So first we want to show the compactness of level sets. So compactness of level sets just follows from the fact that compact sets maps to compact sets under continuous mapping. So you just take set of all y such that j is less than m. That is just f applied to the set of all x such that I is less than m. For the upper and lower bound, we just use this fact, that is probability that yn is in some set A is the same as the probability that xn is in f inverse A. That is, you take the set of all points that map to A. And then once we have this, then you just use the LDP for xn. Okay, so that is a brief introduction to large deviations theory. So now let's come back to our goal. So our goal is to identify, so recall that we had a random perturbation of a dynamical system, and our goal is to identify a suitable function u such that we can get asymptotics of this form. Okay, but so here note that we want asymptotics of the invariant distribution of a Markov process. And as I explained, in most cases, we do not have an explicit expression for p epsilon, except that we only know that this probability measure is invariant for this process x epsilon. So it is natural to study the process itself rather than before studying the invariant measure, and that's what we are going to do next. Okay, so the first step to obtain asymptotics of this form for the invariant measure is naturally to study the process asymptotics of some quantities of the process itself. Okay, so now we go back to example 1. So in example 1, we had an ODE perturbed by a noise. So you can essentially think of the trajectories of this process as a random variable taking values in the space of continuous functions. Okay, so here the epsilon, so 1 over epsilon square stands for n in the definition of large deviation principle. So we have a sequence of random variables, and the space is the space of continuous functions on 0 to t that are real valued. Okay. Now we initially had an ODE, and then we perturb it using noise. So one anticipates that if you put the epsilon, if you let epsilon to 0, then this process converges in some sense to the solution of the ODE that we started with, and it turns out that that is indeed true. So suppose that you let the initial conditions of this process converge to a deterministic point little x, then the trajectory of the process converges to the trajectory of the ODE starting at little x in probability, where this convergence is in sup now. That is, so I've written this goes to this in the C space. So the C space can be metrized in a certain way that gives a complete and separable metric space. Okay, so once we have this convergence result, it is natural to ask how the fluctuations look like. That is, if your trajectory of the process deviates from that of the trajectory of the ODE, what is the probability of that particular event? So here is little x, and here is a solution to the ODE x naught, and then we want. So here is another path, which is phi. So we know that most of the time the process x epsilon trajectory of that is this trajectory is going to be close to this close to x naught, and the probability, and we want probability that this process x epsilon looks like some function phi other than the solution to this ODE. Okay, so that is, so if we can quantify this, then we have the large deviation principle for this process x epsilon. Okay, so here is a precise statement of the theorem. So let x, so you want some convergence of the initial condition. So we say that the initial conditions converge to a little x, a deterministic point little x. Then this trajectory, so these sequence of random variables viewed as random variables taking values in the space of continuous functions satisfy a large deviation principle. Okay, and it is governed by certain rate function s. and the rate function is defined as follows. So remember that the rate function is defined on the space of continuous functions. That is, it takes in a continuous function and outputs a positive real number. So the rate function is defined as follows. So first of all, the rate function is going to be plus infinity if the trajectory do not satisfy something. That is, if the trajectory is not absolutely continuous, then the rate function is plus infinity. And if the trajectory starts at little x and the mapping t to phi t is absolutely continuous, then the rate function is defined in this form. So if t to phi, if phi is absolutely continuous, then it is almost everywhere differentiable. So essentially, in the integrand, you take phi t dot, which is the tangent of the trajectory, and you take negative u prime of phi t, which is the tangent at which you are supposed to go if you were to follow the ODE. And if you don't follow the ODE, then phi t dot is going to be different from this negative u prime of phi t. So you take the difference and then you square it and then integrate over time. Okay. So a similar large deviations in path space can be established for the empirical measure process also. So remember that the empirical measure process mu_n was McKean-Blasov equation plus noise, but the noise was Poissonian, so there were particles were jumping and so on. So you can put this process mu_n in a certain space. So the space is called D0T. So this is the space of functions or space of trajectories on 0 to t that are right continuous and with left limits. Okay, so here also you want the initial conditions to converge to a deterministic point, and turns out that this process mu_n, when viewed as a trajectory in this as a sequence of random variables taking values in this D space, that sequence satisfy a large deviation principle, again with a certain rate function S. So the rate function is defined as follows. Again the rate function is going to be plus infinity on all trajectories that do not possess some regularity. So the regularity is that you should start at nu, because the initial conditions are converging to nu. So you cannot have a deviation in the initial condition. So you should start at nu and the trajectory should be absolutely continuous. So if that is the case, then the rate function is defined as follows. So so this rate function is defined in a variational form. So here, if you look at the first term here, so it's a inner product between alpha t and this term. So again, mu t dot is the trajectory, is the velocity or the tangent at time t of your path. Whereas if you were to follow the McKean-Blasov equation, then you would have taken lambda star times mu t as your tangent. So you take the difference and then you cost it in an appropriate way and then integrate over time. Okay. So note that if you put alpha to be 0, then the whole thing becomes 0. So it's easy to see that this rate function is always positive. And if mu t dot equals lambda star mu t, that is, if you follow the McKean-Blasov equation, then since this tau function, so tau function is defined here, tau is e to the u minus 1. So in particular, tau is always positive. So if you actually follow the McKean-Blasov equation, then this whole thing is going to be 0, because the first term is going to be 0, and the second term, which is tau of something times a positive quantity, that will be minimized by setting alpha equal to 0. Okay, so some remarks about the rate function. So you see that in the first example, we had Gaussian noise, and in the second example, we had Poissonian noise. So the basic quantity that appears in the rate function are log moment generating functions of the underlying noise. So for the standard Gaussian distribution, the function x squared over 2 is the log moment generating function, and for a unit rate Poisson random variable, the log moment generating function is e to the x minus 1. That's our tau function. So that's the first observation. Then I mentioned that the rate function is essentially the cost to produce a given trajectory. So you are actually supposed to go through the ODE in the first example or through the McKean-Blasov equation in the second example. But if there is a deviation, then you're going to take some other trajectory, and to produce that deviation, you need to have some cost, and this cost is what is captured in the rate function. So one difference between the rate functions of in the Gaussian and Poissonian case is that in the Gaussian case, we had a expression that is given a path, you have some cost. Whereas in the Poissonian case, that is in the mean field example, we had a variational problem. So this variational form of the rate function is because multiple controls can produce that same trajectory, and you have to essentially look at the control that produces the least cost trajectory. Whereas in the Gaussian case, in our particular example that we took, a trajectory can be only produced using a control, using a unique control. Okay, so there are many ways to prove these things. So the early ones are Sanoff theorem and the Girsanov transformation. So essentially, you look at a system of independent particles, and if you have independent and they are identically distributed, then you can apply Sanoff theorem, and then you can bring in interaction using certain change of measure argument, and there you use Girsanov transformation. So this was done initially by Dawson and Gardner, and then So another method is to characterize the rate function using exponential martingales. So that is, as soon as you have a Markov process, you can write down certain martingales associated with those Markov processes. So in particular, exponential martingales. And then you use these exponential martingales to show that the rate function admits some condition. And then from that condition, you derive that the rate function must be unique. Okay, so this is done by Puhalski and Lipser. The other two techniques are more recent. So one is called the V convergence approach, where you can write down certain variational formulae for the underlying noise. So in our mean field example, you have some variational expression for the Poisson random measure. And from that, the question of large deviation will boil down to certain questions of V convergence on certain controlled versions of our processes. Okay. So this method was introduced by Bouet and Dupuy and Buddhiraja and others. And the last one, this is a more recent one. This is a method using semi-group convergence. So in V convergence, if you have convergence of generators, then you have V convergence. So similarly, you can look at a semi-group. This is a nonlinear semi-group. So you have to show convergence of a nonlinear semi-group, and then you have to show that the limiting semi-group must admit some condition. And that condition is mostly existence and uniqueness of a solution to a certain PDE. So this method is very recent, and it's done by Feng and Kurtz. Okay, so that concludes the part 2 of the talk, that is large deviations in path space. Any questions? Okay.
If there are no questions, you should probably go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. So now we come to the final part of the talk, which is how to go from large deviations of finite time large deviations to stationary regime, and how to use this to understand metastability. Okay, so let's consider a simple case, which is the unique equilibrium case. So now we will focus on the mean field example from now on. So by a unique equilibrium, I mean that the McKean-Vlasov equation, this is an ODE. This has a unique globally asymptotically stable equilibrium. That is, wherever you start the ODE, you're going to go and converge to psi star. So in this context, it is natural to ask the following. So here I have written two limits. So remember that we want to study stationary behavior of our process mu_n. So that is, we take mu_n of t and then you let time go to infinity. Okay, that is the quantity, and that is the stationary behavior of mu_n. And then you have to look at that stationary behavior in the large n limit. So, okay, so the left-hand side quantity is what we want to study. On the other hand, we have another limit here, which is that you first let n go to infinity. So you take mu_n of t, first let n go to infinity. So from our mean field convergence result, this goes to a deterministic measure, and then you let time go to infinity. So in other words, can we study the stationary behavior of this process mu_n using the large time behavior of this McKean-Vlasov equation? So it turns out that it is indeed the case in when we have a unique equilibrium. So we know that the right hand side in this equality is xi star because of our assumption that the Minkowski-Blasov equation has a unique equilibrium. So it turns out that under this condition, the invariant measure of the process mu(n) goes to a Dirac measure on psi star. So recall that the invariant, so the measure, the process mu(n) has the state space of the process mu(n) is the space of probability measures on Z. So Pn is a probability measure on the probability measures on Z. So is delta psi star. Okay. Okay, so now let's see how to understand large deviations of the invariant measure Pn. So what we expect is that because of the previous convergence result with very high probability under stationarity, you expect that the process is very close to psi star. Okay. Now suppose that there is a deviation. That is, suppose that the process mu(n) is not near psi star, but it's near some other point psi, which is not equal to psi star. Now we can think of this event as the following. So since mu(n) is under stationarity, we can think that the process has already begun at time minus infinity. Okay, at time minus infinity, you are at psi. Okay, so you have already started at time minus infinity. Then as you proceed, you would have already reached stationarity. That is, you would have already reached at psi star, and then we have a. But then we are looking at the event where mu(n) under stationarity is not near psi star but near psi, which is some other point. Okay, so in the stationary regime, it is once we have this interpretation, then it's easy to guess what is the cost. That is, if you're actually supposed to be at psi, but then now you're at some point psi. So you're actually supposed to be at psi star. Now you're at some other point psi. So now the cost is naturally in terms of the rate function that governs the LDP of mu(n). So we have the function S here. So we define the cost is going to be, we take a path mu and evaluate the cost, and the path has, you fix some time minus capital T, and the path should take the value psi star at that point, and it should, and the terminal condition should be psi. And you take the minimum of the cost over all such paths and all such time intervals. Okay. So this is the cost to go from psi stars to psi in the stationary regime. And you can actually show that this function v of psi star comma dot, this governs the LDP for the sequence Pn. Okay, so there are two main ingredients in the proof of this. So if we think about this, we have to deal with trajectories of infinite duration with the terminal condition fixed. So that means that so most often this infimum will be attained by a path which is of infinite duration, and so that infinite duration path we often approximate using finite duration paths. And in that process, the initial condition of this sequence of finite duration paths keep changing. And so one main ingredient in the proof of this is a uniform version of large deviations of mu(n). That's the first ingredient. And the second one is a small cost connection property. So if I look at, if we look at an infinite duration path, and suppose that the path do not touch psi star, but it converges to psi star as you go to time minus infinity, then it's natural to ask, if you start from psi star at a finite time, can you go to a point in this path with a small cost? Okay. So in other words, the two infima here, are they the same? So the first infima is over all finite duration paths that start at psi star, end at psi. And the second infima is over all infinite duration paths that approach psi star. So are these two the same? So the greater than, so one side is clear. So greater than or equal to is clear because the first set is a smaller set. So the infimum is going to be larger. To show the other way inequality, we want a small cost connection. That is, we should be able to go from the point psi star to a nearby point with a small cost. So this is the second ingredient. So if we have the uniform LDP, and so I will explain what this means in the next slide, and this small cost connection, then we can essentially go from finite duration large deviations to stationary regime when the limiting equation has a unique equilibrium. Okay, so let's look at the small cost connection first. So recall that we had the contraction principle, which is that large deviations are preserved under continuous mappings. So first, let's look at a fixed t that is takes a trajectory and then outputs the value at time t. So this mapping is continuous. So you can apply contraction principle to obtain large deviations of this terminal time random variable. So let's say that mu n, the initial conditions converge to a deterministic point. Then tells you that the sequence of random variables mu of t on which are random variables, which are probability, which are m1 of z valued random variables. This sequence satisfy the LDP. So the rate function is given by, you have to look at all paths that start at nu, end at psi, and you look at the least cost among those. So this rate function for this we denote by sp of psi bar nu. And with this notation, notice that the cost function that I introduced in the previous slide is just infimization of this st over time. And this v has the interpretation, as I mentioned in the previous slide, that it's a cost to go from one point to the other. And in the finite dimensional case, that is when your ambient space is finite dimensional, it turns out that this function st is continuous, okay, in most cases. So for example, in our mean field case, turns out that this function st is jointly continuous. And once you show that this st is jointly continuous, then that essentially means that you have the small cost connection property from any point to any other point. So in particular, from psi star to a nearby point. Okay, so that is the first ingredient, which is small cost connection. So second one is uniform LDP. So the uniform large deviations is a stronger form of the Freitlin-Wenzel definition. So to define the uniform LDP, we have to first take a class of subsets of our ambient space. So we take a class A of subsets of M1 of Z, and we say that the process satisfies a uniform large deviation principle over this class if three things hold. So first condition is compactness of lower level sets, but now we want compactness of certain union of sets where union is taken over each union is taken over initial conditions lying in some compact set. Okay, so we take some compact set capital K. For each element of this compact set, we have a space of trajectories that is lower level set, and then we take union over these initial conditions in this compact set, and we want this to be compact. So in our earlier definition, in this we wanted compactness of this when K is a singleton. Okay, for every singleton K, we wanted this to be compact. Now we want for every compact set K this to be compact. And in the lower and upper bound, we want certain uniform estimates uniformly in the initial condition. So here is the changes from the previous definition I have indicated in blue color. So you take any set capital A in this family script A, and then this estimate should hold uniformly over initial conditions lying in the set A. And similarly for the upper bound, you fix a set capital A from the family of subsets, and this estimate should hold uniformly over subset or uniformly over initial conditions lying in A. Okay, so this is what is called uniform LDP. And in many cases, one can essentially transfer the sample path LDP to this uniform version. Okay, and in most cases, the script A, which is a class of subsets of our ambient space, that's going to be the power set. So these are some examples where people have done this already. So first by Fleighton and Wenzel for finite dimensional diffusions, and then in the case of a reaction diffusion equation. So reaction diffusion equation is a certain stochastic PDE, and then Serai-Rockner as an extension of solvers, and then Borker and Sundaresan for our mean field model in the finite state space case. And then there is recent work by Buddhiraja for a class of Banach space valued STEs. So in summary, in the unique equilibrium case, once we have the uniform LDP, and it turns out that this uniform LDP suffices on compact sets. Okay, so that is this script A, this family of subsets is the set of all compact subsets of our ambient space. If we can prove a uniform LDP over that class, and if we have the small cost connection property, then one can essentially transfer the path space LDP to a uniform LDP. Okay. So that is about the single equilibrium case. So in this, so now we go to multiple equilibria. So when we have multiple equilibria, let's take this example. So there are 5 equilibria here. So we know that when the process starts near an equilibrium, then the process spends near that equilibrium for a very long time, and then finally after a very long time it exits that equilibrium and then even goes to some other equilibrium and so on. So essentially most of the action takes place near these equilibria. So in other words, you can define a hitting time chain, which is a discrete Markov chain whose state space is K1 union K2 union K3 and so on. And the hitting, so whenever the process mu1 hits equilibrium, you define set little n as mu1 of tau n. Once we have this hitting time Markov chain, so note that this hitting time Markov chain is a finite state space chain, and then we can use the uniform LDP to show that this hitting time chain has one-step transition probabilities of this form. That is, probability that you go from Ki to Kj is of the form e to the minus n times v of Ki comma Kj. And since this is a finite state space chain, we can actually write down the invariant measure using the Markov chain tree theorem. And once we have the invariant distribution for Zn, then you can essentially reconstruct the invariant distribution for mu(n) from that of Zn. So this is done by Kazminski. And the cost that is the rate function that governs the LDP looks like this. So there is a number W associated with each equilibrium. So first you have to pay that much cost, that is for reaching that equilibrium, and then from there you go to a point psi, and then you take the minimum over all such trajectories. And this Wi, that is this number associated with each equilibrium, that essentially describes the invariant measure of Zn. And so the key properties used in this program, that is first obtain the hitting time chain, then evaluate its transition probability, then reconstruct the invariant measure from the invariant measure of Zn. So this program requires 3 key properties of our process. So one is the strong Markov property of mu(n), and then we need the uniform LDP for mu(n), and then we want the continuity of the quasi-potential V, that is the cost to go function that I showed. So if we have these 3 properties, then we can essentially implement this program to obtain large deviations in the stationary regime. Okay, now I will briefly tell you some technicalities in infinite dimension. So infinite dimensional examples are where your ambient space is infinite dimensional. That is some so the both example 1 and example 2 that we looked at were finite dimensional examples. That is, your system was evolving on a finite dimensional space. So in this example, so here we have examples such as stochastic PDEs, then mean field model on the integers. So if you have a mean field model whose state space is the whole of integers, then you are on the space of probability measures on integers, and that's an infinite dimensional space. So in infinite dimensional settings, there are many challenges. So first challenge is to show existence and uniqueness of the invariant measure. So this itself is you have to show this. So in our finite state space mean field example, the state space was actually finite, and then So once we assume that every particle can reach from one state to the other, then using irreducibility, you can show that there exists a unique invariant probability measure. But for infinite dimension, you have to work hard and show this. So another challenge is to establish this small cost connection. So I mentioned that small cost connection is established using continuity of this rate function, but this continuity will not hold in infinite dimension, because on one hand, ST being a rate function has compact level sets, but the infinite dimensional nature of the space essentially makes the space something that is not locally compact. So because of these two conditions, your function ST cannot be continuous. So a simple example to keep in mind is the relative entropy functional in the first argument for a fixed second argument. So this, and if you think of this relative entropy function on the space of probability measures on integers, that cannot be continuous. But it has compact level sets, which can be easily seen from the Donsker-Varden variational form. So as a consequence of this, V cannot be continuous, but still we need to show some regularity property of V. So by that I mean that, for example, you will have to show that this V is finite on the set of measures whose second moment is finite, for example, and then and this is continuous on measures whose, let's say, third moment is bounded, some regularity of this sort. Another challenge is to show the uniform LDP. So in the multiple equilibrium case, in finite dimensions, the existence of an invariant measure for the chain Zn is true, but it's not trivial. It's non-trivial in infinite dimension. And also you have to essentially extend the Kosminski reconstruction to infinite dimension. So these are some challenges that we will face when we want to go to the stationary regime large deviations from finite duration large deviations in an infinite dimensional problem. Okay. So these are some recent progress in this area. So there is work by Martirosyan where he considers a situation where the heating time chain Zn may not possess an invariant measure. Okay, so he introduces something called generalized stationary distribution, and then he works with that. Then there is a recent work by Puhalski who shows some general conditions under which you can derive LDP for the invariant measure from that of sample path LDP. And then there is recent work by Buddhiraja who derives a uniform LDP for a Banach space valued SDEs. And then finally, Salins and Spiliopoulos, they show in an infinite dimensional setting certain continuity properties, that certain regularity properties of the function V. Okay, so here are some open questions. So one is uniform LDP for the mean field example in infinite dimensions. So I'm not aware of such a result even when the particles do not interact. But we can easily get the LDP over compact uniform LDP on compact subsets by essentially transferring the finite uniform LDP. But it turns out that this suffices for the problem of invariant measure, at least when there is a unique equilibrium. Okay. A more broader question is how can we have a general result from which we can conclude the uniform LDP from sample path LDP. So Puhalski answers this question to some extent, but unfortunately his conditions will not be satisfied by an infinite dimensional problem. And similarly, Borker and Sundaresan does this for the finite state mean field model using a control theoretic approach. Again, some of the assumptions that they have will not be satisfied in infinite dimensions. Okay, so that concludes the talk. So basically we looked at, so I introduced this phenomenon called metastability phenomenon. And then I introduced theory of large deviations, and then I broadly spoke about how to go from finite duration large deviations to stationary regime. So broadly, there are two techniques. One, when the limiting equation has a unique equilibrium. So in that case, using a small cost movement plus uniform LDP on compact sets, you can go from finite duration to stationary regime. When there are multiple equilibria, then you have to look at a heating time chain and then a Kosminski reconstruction. And here you need this small cost movement along with the full LDP, that is LDP over class of open subsets of the ambient space. Okay, so here are some references. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharath. So perhaps we can clap. If anyone has questions, then close open for questions.
Maybe Sharath, I'll ask a generic question.
Yes.
Suppose a new student wants to pick up the tools to be able to do research in this topic.
Okay.
What are the things that that person must learn?
Okay, you should know probability theory, and then little bit of functional analysis. Yeah, I think that's all. And one can start from the book of Friedin and Menzel.
Sharath, can I ask a sort of a strange question? So, what are the surprises that you expect when you prove something like this? In the sense that is it possible that are there examples where some strange thing happens that you have guessed a mean field limit but the LDP principle doesn't hold? Do you expect that? Or it is a sanity test that let's show some LDP principle holds?
No, there are, okay, all of these require some conditions. So for example, so let me go back to the first example. So, okay, so I am not mentioned about the assumptions in the talk. So let's say, so in this example, if you want to show, so first of all, for this ODE to be well defined, you want U to be Lipschitz continuous. And similarly, for a solution for this SDE to exist, you want U to be Lipschitz continuous. So one thing is that there are certain assumptions that you need to prove the LDP, and so I was initially trying the infinite dimensional problem, but then later it turned out that
those are sufficient conditions, right?
Yeah. So I had actually worked out something using some assumptions, but then those assumptions will not be satisfied in an infinite dimensional setting. So you have to be careful about the assumptions on your model. So it's not like all the time there will be an LDP. I mean, there are examples where LDPs don't hold, and there are examples where convergence also do not hold. Did I answer?
So I have another follow-up question. So suppose you have this particular equation that you have displayed, but when you pass to the limit and let epsilon, when you actually substitute epsilon equal to 0, let us say that you don't have a unique solution.
Okay.
So that means one of the key assumptions that you need for your LDP to hold is no longer true.
Yes.
Now, do you think your theory might help us understand if there are multiple solutions?
Yeah.
Which one might be the best solution? Can you comment on that?
Yeah, at least in the existing proofs so for example, Friedin Menzel, what they do is they assume that this ODE is well posed, and they use that solution to show the LDP. And similarly, in all of the cases that I have encountered, people assume that the ODE is well posed and then show the LDP. So recently there are interests in mean field games. So in a mean field game, if there are multiple equilibria, that corresponds to multiple solution of a certain Machin-Blasov equation. if that is the case, people are yet trying to show the LDP. So if there is a unique equilibrium, then we know how to show the LDP using the solution of that equation. But yeah, the proofs that I have seen all require well-posedness of the limiting equation.
So just as a follow-up, I think I have seen some proofs of situations where you don't have unique equilibrium or unique solution to the ODE. There are multiple solutions. Okay. But then the approach that they take to determine which is the which of the several solutions is natural, okay, and that's what you should expect. They typically, I mean, there seems to be some sort of an LDPS argument there, okay, but the approach taken is more like a limit law type approach. Okay. I think there might be a good marriage between LDP approach to those settings, yeah, and okay, problems where it has not yet been used. So
I think it will help to predict what solutions will get picked if you start from some point.
Maybe one more comment. You recently may have seen Professor Anurag Kumar's talk where he spoke about finite n and then the approximation, fixed point approximation, okay, the kind of starting point for your research being good in some cases, but then being bad in some other cases. One of the things that he said is short-term unfairness in the Wi-Fi system.
Yes.
So do you have any comments on how your theory may be applicable? Once again, this is more of a discussion. We have had this discussion offline, but this is an online discussion for the sake of others as well.
So it is so in this short time unfairness, I think of the network having multiple equilibria, that is multiple stable regions. So this example that I showed. So here in this example, there are two equilibria, one near the origin and one near this point. So this when you have short-term unfairness, I think of that as being that system being getting trapped in a bad equilibrium, and then it takes a long time to exit out of that equilibrium. That's what I was thinking about.
In that context, you said bad equilibrium and good equilibrium. Actually, when one of the nodes is hogging the channel, okay, and the others are not getting an opportunity, that I kind of think of that as an efficient solution, because this one node is continuously transmitting, others are transmitting at a slower pace, and as a consequence, there are fewer collisions in the system. Now, of course, I think the bad thing about this is that one node gets the channel all the time. Yeah. And so there might be interest in having this efficient solution, and that is allocation of the channel to one user, and then a quick move in some way to another solution where another node actually gets to hog the channel. So this way, in some uncoordinated way, you're achieving coordination. But is there a way by which you can come up with a means by which you transit from this one node hogging the channel to another node hogging the channel, so that you leverage these settings to ensure that there are fewer collisions, but at the same time the unfairness is reduced? So any thoughts on that, on how to engineer this?
So if when there are multiple equilibrium, we can actually steer the process towards one of the global minimizers of this rate function by adding particles over time. But I think in the fixed number of particles context, I'm not sure how to do that. But it will require a protocol change.
Yeah, so I think somehow the lambda ij's may have to vary with time and based on the state of each individual node as well. So anyway, something to think about.
So this is Gugan here.
Yes.
I just wanted to add to the question that Rajesh asked. So can we not take a linear combination and decrease the weights for one of the users and simultaneously increase the weights for the other user?
Yeah, you could do that, but I'm not sure whether that will fall in our mean field setting. Or, yeah, I mean, you have to basically change the function lambda over time, I guess.
I mean, it might still fall in the mean field setting, but it might not. Mean field is just that there is a field, but it's a time varying system. So, is that what?
Yeah, it is. There are also control problems. Maybe we can pause that efficient solution as a control problem and try to solve that. Maybe that's one possibility.
Another question. I don't mean to hog the question channel, but just to link this with one of the previous talks that you gave. Can you comment on the connection between this and the second eigenvalue problem? And what is the cause of the metastability and things like that?
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So if you if we have this process, there are some operators associated with these Markov processes, and if we have some kind of spectral expansion for those operators, then the convergence is governed by second largest eigenvalue, and I don't have them here. So. So it turns out that these numbers Wi. So if you recall this Markov chain tree theorem, so these in order to express the invariant measure, you have to essentially look at sums of products of transition probabilities, where these products are taken over certain graphs. So. For the second eigenvalue. In the particular case when the process is reversible, you can say that the second eigenvalue governs convergence to stationarity, and the form of the second so there is a connection between the asymptotics of the second eigenvalue, and you can express that second eigenvalue asymptotics using these numbers Wi. So there is a connection between this LDP and the second eigenvalue of these processes. I don't have I have it written here. Sorry.
Second eigenvalue of the generator of the Markov process associated.
Yeah. So that is the operator that I mentioned.
Krishna?
Yeah. So if that's all are the questions, then yeah. Let's thank Sharath again.
Thank you.
So we'll have a network seminar the coming week on August 4th, Tuesday again the same time. The speaker will be Lakshmi Ramesh, and we'll send out an announcement about this soon. Thank you everyone for attending. Yeah, this completes the call.